I would like to request our session chair, Professor Mizan R. Khan, to continue the session. Thank you.
Hello, distinguished participants. I am Professor Mizan Khan. I now hold an international hat in the name of technical lead of the LDC Universities Consortium on Climate Change, which is an official program of the 46 LDC governments under the UNFCCC process. I am a veteran civil society but government negotiator with the Bangladesh and the LDC chairs delegation for the last 24 years in the UN negotiation process. I am also a visiting professor in many Western universities, including in France and particularly at Brown University and at my School of Public Policy, where I did my graduate studies in the 1990s. Okay, so with this little background, I have a number of books published by MIT Press, Routledge from London and New York, and Cambridge on climate change, economics, and politics, and lots of articles, peer-reviewed journals, including in Science and Nature. Okay, with this little background, you have seen the program that we have two distinguished speakers. On my right is Air Vice Marshal Mahmoud Hussain, Dr. Mahmoud Hussain, and on my left is Professor Salma Malik from Pakistan. I will introduce them in details, but let me introduce the topic a little today of today's session. We have the two presentations with different titles you have seen in the program, but I think both the discussions will lead to one thread, that is about environment and climate security, but looking through maybe different lenses. I have seen the paper of Dr. Hussain, but not yet Professor Malik's. But anyway, so you all know that over time, security paradigms are changing and keeps on changing. Beginning with the military security, came economic security in the 70s, and then by the end of the 70s, we have the concept of environmental security initiated by Lester Brown, the then World Watch Institute, and then many other authors like Barry Buzan, Robert Kaplan, Norman Myers, all have extensively written on what does environmental security mean. And you know that our common future of the Brundtland Commission report first broached the idea of the linkage between resource scarcity, environmental degradation, and security risks. And then in the 90s, environmental security started to subsume climate security as the central concern of environmental security. And led by Dr. Mahbubul Haq of Pakistan at the UNDP, this concept of human security came in because national security implying military security doesn't have any meaning if the human beings, if the citizens are not secured. And from the 90s, you know, climate change impacts are pounding us extremely, particularly in the LDCs and low-income countries and the small island developing states, which will face watery deaths. In Bangladesh, about almost 20% of the territory, given the no mitigation, 20% of our land will go underwater permanently. So this is a serious security threat for us. And poverty is going up and up because of climate change impacts, not just in Bangladesh. We were doing better as an LDC compared to many others, but Africa particularly will be impacted most. So with these, and then in this South Asian context, for example, and in the global phenomena, Aruna, you know, securitization has been taking place. All the major powers are doing studies on climate change and security, but from the military security perspective, because their military bases will go underwater, both direct and indirect threats emanate from climate change impacts. And even you know that the Security Council initiated 3 special sessions. One was pioneered by Pakistan, starting from 2007, this UN session led by UK, and the second one most probably was pioneered by Pakistan in 2011, as I remember. There is huge debate of involvement of UN Security Council in climate change, because the Security Council chapter does not exactly allow to involve in maintaining kind of climate security. Anyway, and then in coming to South Asian context, for example, we have serious problem. Increasingly, you know that cross-border or what we call transboundary risks are becoming more and more prominent. I think the speakers will give examples in the South Asian context where adaptation by one country may very negatively impact the other countries. Bangladesh, India is the example, for example. So with this context, I will not spend more time on this. Now, let me introduce our first speaker, Air Vice Marshal Mahmood Hussain, Dr. Mahmood Hussain, who has a very distinguished career, who served as commissioned officer in Air Force for long 37 years. And then he was High Commissioner of Bangladesh to Brunei, Dar es Salaam for about 5 years. Then he also served in the then Yugoslavia and Congo in the UN peace missions as military observers. And he has also distinguished other professional backgrounds, chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority of Bangladesh, and then also he led South Asian civil aviation authorities for some time, for about 2 years. He has also a master's both from the Bangladesh National Defense College as well as the US Air Force Staff College, and an MPhil and PhD in international relations. His main interests lie in international relations and aerospace technology and all those. So with these words, please let me invite you for your presentation. Though the program shows half an hour, but I will request you to finish in 25 minutes so that we can have more time for discussion. That is what, as a professor, I want to have we want to have a dialogue with the audience. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It was a very rich introduction of me. I'm not so rich, in fact, just a soldier or an airman, you can say that. Special guest, Dr. Burns Spanier. Session Chair, Professor Mizan Khan. Co-speaker, Dr. Salma Malik. And distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. At the outset, I extend my gratitude to Major General A.N. Muniruzzaman to ask me to give a presentation on the security sector's role in climate security. It is extremely kind of him to have considered me worthy of presenting a paper on such an important global issue in front of such an august gathering. It is a rare privilege for me, as I have little epistemic learning about climate security. Most of my climatic association in the sense this conference is about comes from my practical experience. I was a helicopter pilot in Bangladesh Air Force and was involved intimately in post-disaster relief operations. I will talk about 30 minutes for my presentation. Now, the Great Bhola Cyclone of 1970 is the deadliest recorded human disaster in recent history. The probable death to the cyclone was anything between 300,000 and 500,000 casualties. Now, the cyclone had an unforgiving consequence on Pakistan. General Yahya Khan, the Chief Martial Law Administrator, was harshly criticized for the government's poor handling of the cyclone relief operations. Bitterness in East Pakistan swelled into a forbidding grief. The anger of East Pakistanis did not subside. That had its root in the apathetic attitude shown by the West Pakistani rulers during the cyclone. The Vortex by Scott Kearney and Jason McLean describes how Yahya Khan's indifference to the Bhola cyclone sparked the 1971 Bangladesh War of Liberation. The outcome was a national disaster for Pakistan, resulting in its disintegration. The Bhola incident leaves a lesson, which is failure to respond to climatic onslaught effectively at state level can have adverse impacts on political security. Climate is an interplanetary issue whose scope reaches beyond our atmosphere into the space. Climate also conditions human civilization. It is a subset of the environmental security, which is about the geographical stability of land, sea, air, and space, and the paradigms that give these entities their security legitimacy. Climate security and environmental security are coterminous. The organizing concept for both of them is the existential threat to human lives. However, wherever there are humans, there is politics. It is this political aspect of climate phenomenon that makes the security sector's role so important to develop a framework of cooperation among states. The methodology of my presentation constitutes 5 steps. First, how climate is securitized in the broad spectrum of security problematic. Second, an attempt is made to understand how climate is perceived at different cognitive levels. Third, how the logic of threats and vulnerabilities to climate proliferate into regional and global arena. Fourth, why it is important to pressurize the military to take on climate security as a serious issue for developing concepts, strategies, and partnerships. The 5th step includes some recommendations for security sector's role in climate security. Now, security is about survival. It is the fundamental principle of existence to our civilization and our universe. The Peace of Westphalia has reiterated the importance of 2 beings, nation-states and their citizens. The binary complex is useful for highlighting the fact that we would like to see security as objectively given and as well embedding within it an ontological truth. Bouzon et al. Takes the wider framework of security, which is extremely important in order to understand the different visages of climate security. There are 5 security sectors that work at individual, state, regional, and global levels. These sectors are political, military, economic, societal, and environmental. Now, my presentation is concerned with environmental security issues, which play out to the encroachment of economic and societal sectors, as well as political and military agenda. Not every threat or vulnerability can be called a security paradigm. In the climate subsector, if there is a need to securitize, then the issues must meet something much more substantive than just any threat or vulnerability. These issues must have referent objects, threats to whose existence demand emergency measures. The range of possible referent objects in climate sector is very large. These can be as varied from the survival of living beings like individual species of mankind, animals, plants, and marine population to physiogeographical referent objects with the underlying security problematic resulting in catastrophic human migration, loss of land, and disruption of ecosystem. This amounts to destroying the existing structure of human civilization. There are several theories about the ruin of the Indus Valley civilization, including invasion by nomadic Indo-Aryans and earthquakes, but by studying the climate sets of data, climate change has proved to be the most likely cause. Myers, the political scientist, describes environmental security as the ultimate security. Climate, being a prime referent object, is everywhere on the list, most notably cyclone, floods, sea level rise, droughts, and famine. Undoubtedly, climate plays a significant role in the discourse of societal and economic security, as the spatial limit of environment on land and sea boundaries is marked by the territorial integrity of a state. It has claims to political and military agenda. Climate denies any notion of sovereignty. Edward Lawrence's deduction of the butterfly effect to the phenomenon of tornado as influenced by minor disturbances such as butterfly flapping its wings thousands of miles away in a distant continent has shaped our fear of the climate as a global threat. The notion of climate security includes two different agendas. One is scientific and the other political. The rational reply of the scientific agenda is to fight global warming, which results from CO2 greenhouse gas emission. It computes how the maximum energy is to be got with the minimum emission of the greenhouse gases. The answer is decarbonization. If global warming is the effect of insecure climate, the cause is the CO2. The idea is to keep the rise in global temperature well below 2 degrees centigrade, which is pre-industrial standard. But the problems still exist. The 2012 World Bank report considers a rise of 2 degrees centigrade the maximum the world could reasonably adapt to. And a rise of 4 degrees centigrade will be fatal for global security. This is wherein comes the political agenda into play, but the political agenda is also fraught with complex biases. The complexity of the political agenda depends on how much the rich countries are willing to come to the rescue of the poor countries. China, United States, and India alone account for more than half of the world's CO2 emission. Salimul Haq, the biologist and climate activist from Bangladesh, has taken the political agenda to the moral height. For him, the terms loss and damage were euphemisms, for he really wanted to replace them by liability and compensation. But neither Europe nor the United States would accept his terms, let alone the incriminating word reparations. The attitude of the rich countries is inexplicable enough to annoy the poor. They want to give money as loans on repayment basis. This money which they want earmarked for mitigation, such as wind and solar power, could turn a commercial profit, not for adaptation. At COP26, Salimul Haq brought a Bangladeshi woman farmer to talk to the delegates. She talked about her distress due to climate change. There is a need for richer countries to come to recognize the true weight of damage and loss. The other sweep of decarbonization is carbon trading. It puts carbon pricing in the market. Carbon taxes, to be honest, hit the poorer countries in a way that cut across the economy. In that case, it violates the UN-mandated Sustainable Development Goals of ending poverty and hunger in all forms. Decarbonization faces a setback when Donald Trump, who has called climate change a Chinese hoax, has announced that the United States will withdraw from the landmark Paris Climate Agreement. It has struck a blow to the worldwide efforts to combat global warming. Experts fear other countries, especially China and India, the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas after the United States, could use it as a reason to put off their obligation to check carbon emission. Securitizing moves in terms of decarbonization at the global level has been limited. Great powers flirting with their pledge to reduce CO2 emission and contribute to climate fund. Climate security has resulted in considerable politicization. However, success in securitizing climate has occurred mainly at the local levels and at times with significant results. In 2021, when floods drowned 70 people in wealthy Germany, the usual seasonal cyclone in Bangladesh caused only 30 deaths. After the local comes the regional factorization of climate security. Climate politics are ruled by the political power structures, despite the fact that its negative externalities impact upon the contending parties mutually. The logic of climate security is about threats. Without enemies, regional cooperation involving climate security needs empirical research and case-by-case, issue-based approach to environmental problems. But cooperation does not come so easily. It is even more complex when the political division of the regional states is based on imagined choice of national identity. Climate denies any notion of sovereignty to get a detailed assessment of security dynamics of climate sector involving military, economics, societal, and politics. These examples are illuminating. 1. How does the climate security manifest itself in time and space to the regional states? This involves mainly the scientific agenda of the issue area. Bangladesh is a lower riparian country, and its three great rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Meghna, form a veritable floodplain. Bangladesh is considered small because it is surrounded on three sides by India. Actually, it is vast. And a veritable aquatic culture where getting around by boat and vehicle can take many days. China and India are the upper riparian countries and can play the hydro-hegemon to Bangladesh. The other example of hydropolitics in South Asia is the emergent water security complex between India and Pakistan over the Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Satluj rivers. 4. Who are the veto and functional actors? This is an economic and social issue. There is a strong trace of geopolitics underlying the energy requirements of developing countries. On the other hand, the developed world is capable of compelling energy-deficient countries to accept life-threatening power plants. The 1,320 megawatt Rampal power plant in Bangladesh is an example of geopolitics testing the nerves of climate security. The signing and later cancellation of another 1,320 megawatt of coal-fired power plant with a Chinese company in the island of Maheshkali in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, is another example of political and scientific agenda being at crossroads. In the poverty-related forms of economic security, the issue of climate and global warming is linked to the veto speeches of the population and government energy caucus. If we make a list of securitized vulnerabilities to Bangladesh, climate and environment pose an overwhelming challenge to its population. 5. How much a climate-related issue area is linked with regional and global scientific agenda? In South Asia, countries like Bangladesh, India, and the Maldives are highly vulnerable to rising sea levels. Indian Ocean is warming faster than other seas compared to the global average. This has a profound cost on the economic and displacement concerns of the victims across South Asia, resulting in their identity crisis, a societal security agenda. The linking of climate vulnerability with identity crisis of the displaced population is not merely related to problems inside one's own country, but can also have spillover effects into the neighboring states. 10 to 50 million people will be under sea level in South Asia by 2100. Now, securitization always involves political choice. If we divide the world into two blocks, rich and poor, we find that the rich has caused most of the climate change and the poor is suffering the worst. While the G2 countries are jointly responsible for 80% of global emissions, South Asia, with 25% of global population of 180 million, is responsible for 9 to 10%, with India alone accounting for 7%. Bangladesh and Pakistan have been collectively responsible for less than 1.5%. This suggests that South Asia as a bloc is in a unique position to claim its rightful reparation from the rich world pretending to be the environmental leader. South Asia receives the lowest in climate adaptation financing. South Asia will gain a lot if it constructs a structural regional approach to climate change. It is well past time for Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, along with Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Maldives, to begin region-wide dialogue on climate adaptation and mitigation. Unlike military, security sector, that of climate is not a zero-sum game. By nature, the climate crises are transnational. It is wiser to distinguish climate change as phenomena to prevent the instinct for politicization. With timely management of potential problems, panic politics can be avoided. In that sense, climate security stands apart from other types of security sectors, military, economic, societal, and political, in perceiving the existential threats to common man. Now to the last section of my presentation, that is climate security and the military. One area of the security sector is noticeably, I repeat, noticeably absent from countries' plan to stop climate change is the world's militaries. United Nations does not require states to report on carbon emissions from their armies, warships, weapons, and aircraft, say fighter jets. It is an irony that whether armed forces should decarbonize is left to the decision of individual governments. Notwithstanding, scientists and other climate experts have raised the alarm about the military black hole in the global emission counting. In 2022, in the scientific journal Nature, a group of scientists and policy experts recorded their statements as follows. I quote, "Military emissions need to be put on the global agenda. They must be officially recognized and accurately reported in national inventories. And military operations need to be decarbonized." Unquote. Among the biggest consumers of fuel, militaries account for 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite high. But this figure also seems underestimated. One recent study, not peer-reviewed, has suggested that the first 60 days of the Israel-Palestine war in Gaza shed more than 281,000 metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Russia's war in Ukraine records emitting 150 million tons of CO2 till June 2024. The US military, with more than 700 bases worldwide, its emissions are the highest, rivaling the entire annual output of smaller nations. From the foregoing data, we can extrapolate that in most countries, military would be one of the biggest polluters. If the world's militaries were a country, it would have the fourth highest carbon footprint. The big question is how to balance between a sustainable environment and a credible defense. Heavy military platforms use high-power energy sources. These are the combat tanks, the naval vessels, and most forbiddingly, the fighter aircraft. In these areas, alternative energy sources are also not available. So interface between the military and the civil is the most important issue to address climate change. Like any global system, there are three levels of interface between the military and climate security. Number one, the first level is global. This level looks at climate change in terms of three main drivers of change: resource scarcity, population growth, and geopolitical fragmentation. These drivers have vast latent security costs and can accelerate frictions leading to conflicts. This makes climate change a matter of international security, but to most militaries, climate security seems unfamiliar and an abstract thing. The future military planners would do good to their national security strategy by including epistemic, functional, and geographic role and capacity building of the armed forces to deal with climate change in an international environment. The second level is regional. Fragmented countries are often vulnerable places with poor governmental institutions and economies. Not to let climate change act as a risk multiplier, regional militaries must not use their mindset to reflect a securitization of the disasters. This is a problem because armed forces may end up doing more harm than good if they mistake a disaster for a security threat or an opportunity to exploit a neighbor's vulnerabilities. Good neighborly relations always help militaries to produce the maximum assistance with minimum local resources in terms of regional role of the military in climate security. So regional militaries forming climate security and access is in their national interest. NATO, for example, is developing mitigation and adaptation policies and has announced its goal to be a net zero organization by 2050. The third level is local. In the first place, there is the intelligence estimate from forecasting and early warning. This estimate should contain the security effects of climate change. If the climate change is estimated as risk multiplier, it should be integrated into risk models. This helps other departments to build a more comprehensive view for the planning of mitigation and adaptation programs. It becomes imperative for the military to see that climate security strategy becomes part of the whole of government approach. And finally, my recommendations are based on extrapolating the arguments placed in this presentation so far, which are also relevant for Bangladesh military. The first one is the military should develop a national security strategy, including climate security as a main driver of change in the environment. Number two, the climate strategy as part of the national security strategy should be comprehensive, involving other agencies and departments. Third, military institutions must give importance to climate science. I repeat again, military institutions must give due importance to the climate science and its related subjects as part of its professional development and education, the way studies on peacekeeping operations are attributed in military school. Fourth, the military should act in cooperation with the industries to allocate funds for research and development for innovating self-sustaining military platforms. And finally, climate change is a transnational problem. The regional militaries should continuously learn from each other's experience of local climate change impacts and involve themselves in joint, I repeat again, in joint training and exercises. They should feel the necessity of establishing a regional institute of climate studies like we have in Bangladesh called BIPSS, the Bangladesh Institute of Peace Support Operations and Training. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Hussain, for your excellent presentation. I will not again repeat the main points. While summarizing at the end, I will do. But one issue that I must mention is that Vice Marshal has presented a very expansive and broad spectrum of security conceptualizations, which for right reasons are very much valid and needed by such senior military officials. Because as he ended with the idea of capacity building of the military establishments and the military personnel, introducing them with climate science and climate impacts. This is very important. So now we have the second distinguished presenter, Professor Dr. Salma Malik, who will make a presentation on No Planet, No Peace, the global implications of climate security. Professor Malik has got a distinguished professional and academic background. She started as an research officer at the Institute of Strategic Studies. She has a PhD from the Uppsala University and a master's from the Hawaii Institute of Asia Pacific Studies, as well as from some other institute. And now she has got lots of publications in national defense and security issues of Pakistan and the small arms trade, etc. So let us invite Professor Salma Malik for her presentation. 25 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mizan Rehman Khan Sahab, for such a kind and generous introduction. AVM Mahmood Hussain Sahab for really setting the tone of the first plenary. To Dr. Brent Spanier, General Muniruzzaman Sahab, and to all the distinguished speakers and participants of this conference. First of all, it is so wonderful being in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, seeing this mega city becoming mightier with time. My first time to Dhaka, courtesy again to General Muniruzzaman and the BIISS, was in 2008. And at that time, we could only reach one place to another within 10 kilometers radius within 2 to 3 hours. Yesterday, I reached 20 kilometers within 1.5 hours, so that's quite a progress. But that also speaks for the fact that cities are becoming bigger, busier, and becoming bigger and busier also means that there's a lot of commerce and livelihood that is associated with big cities. Where that is a great thing for many of us, that also kind of brings us to this unfortunate reality that living in big cities also means living with changed realities, adapting to the big city culture. And that is all of these aspects which are wedded to our theme of this conference, the climate change. How the average global temperature in these cities and around us are changing. How one practice taking place in somewhere in the world has a drastic impact on any of us living in even the most remote corners of the world. While reading up on this particular aspect, I came across the Arctic effect, which is affecting Pakistan as well as the rest of South Asia, as Pakistan is part of the third pole, which has one of the massive ice covers, and some of our countries, Nepal included, are fortunate still to have that snow and ice cover. But this fortune may not be an endless fortune for many of us. We are part of that fortunate generation, which is actually living and witnessing all of these colors, the fascination, the mood swings of climate in real time now. But would our future generations be fortunate enough to actually see what the 4 seasons look like? I cannot do that anymore. I'm in my early 50s. I'm exposing it to the world. When I was a young girl living in Islamabad, an artificial city, not like Dhaka, not a natural city, but it was constructed in the foothills of the Magla Mountains, which provides Islamabad a very fascinating, scenic aspect and life to it. I know that we had 4 seasons, and those 4 seasons were very pronounced. We had to gradually move from fall to winters, from winters to spring, from spring to summers, and we had school uniforms for all 4 seasons. We had epidemics for all 4 seasons. We had several things that went for all seasons. The flora and the fauna, the colors of spring and the colors of autumn were very pronounced, and now you don't have that. In my city, in the last few months, the winters were not wintry enough. We hardly ended up wearing the woolies that we had brought out and were looking forward to wearing them and accessorizing them. The winters were just 1.5 months long and not even intense, which is so unfortunate because we are going to be cursed with a summer which is going to be endless, starting as of March and ending in October. If you're fortunate for it to end in October. In fact, it will kind of spill over to half of November, which leaves us with only 2 months of winters. And I think this is something which is not exclusive to Islamabad. It is something which is becoming a common occurrence for most of us. So what is happening around us? The planet is giving us signal after signal. Unfortunately, we are not listening to it. We must listen to what the climate is telling us, because the need is to focus on actions and findings today. What is happening with the climate, as the previous speaker has so aptly highlighted, is not something which will wait for its consequences in future. The future consequences are going to be just as much as what they are, but it is going to happen to us in real time. AVM Hussain talked about Cyclone Bhola. Those who remember Cyclone Bhola in Pakistan of today remember how devastating the cyclone's effect not only on the people of Pakistan, the combined Pakistan were at that time, how many precious lives were lost. They remember it with a lot of sobering thinking. Whenever the super floods of today take place, the first thought is of Cyclone Bhola. Because we didn't do enough then, we are not doing enough now. Between 71 to 2022, several Cyclone Bholas have taken place or something akin to that. But have we really risen and woken up to the glaring fact that this is an alarming bell that is ringing on top of us and we are not really paying enough attention to it? Let alone to feel that that also led to the dismemberment of the country, which is so unfortunate. And we have these small insurgencies, militancies call for better regional understanding, better provincial understanding whenever a flood takes place in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or in Balochistan or anywhere around us, and we don't realize, thank you, sir. Sorry, I have a habit of pushing this down. We need to understand that climate change is not only something which is happening to climate, it has a very strong cascading impact, which has a very strong imprint on the civil-military relations of a country. It has a very strong imprint on the interprovincial harmony. It has a strong imprint on what has brought so many security sector providers in this audience today about the civil and military relationship. Many a times we look at climate change or the impact of climate change and look at the post-disaster impacts through the lens of the security sector. They're the first providers, they do the rescue, they do the rehabilitation, and once that is happening, we wait for another disaster to take place, and then once again we call back the military or the paramilitary because we feel that they are most adept at handling these problems. But that's not the entire representation of the country. That is not addressing the civil-military relation. That is just firewalling. That is just firefighting. And I think we need to move far beyond the firefighting potential that our countries are gradually and unfortunately adopting when it comes to climate change and responding to that. So when we look at the overall impact of climate change and what we are doing to that, unfortunately for countries such as Pakistan or the South Asian region, which is one of the most affected regions of the world, most vulnerable regions of the world, when we look at each and every country of South Asia, whether it be Afghanistan, it could be Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Nepal, all of these countries, Maldives, all of these countries have very strong vulnerabilities, individual vulnerabilities. Some of them have common vulnerabilities as well. And like COVID-19, these vulnerabilities are not gender, race, color, caste, creed, or border specific. They have a cascading impact. They have a very, very indiscriminate impact on these countries. But when we look at it from a regional lens, we don't really have a South Asian regional lens to address these problems. We have done the necessary tick marks. We have several South Asian protocols. Whenever it is required, we even resort to those protocols. But have we really gone ahead and carried out a South Asian measure for climate change or doing a combined effect? That we don't, because we are too busy playing politics with one another, let alone to have a South Asian regional response to climate change. Because if there's something which is happening to Pakistan, I'm sorry to say India feels happy. If there's something happening to India, Pakistan feels happy, and so on and so forth. So we keep feeling happy in each other's misery without realizing that this misery is something that is going to happen within microseconds to us as well. So we really need to change our mindsets. But the second aspect is that when we look at the climate change debate globally, we have trapped ourselves in the vulnerability syndrome. We are the victims. We are the victims of climate change. We are the recipients of climate change. We are the most vulnerable because of not what we have done to ourselves. We are vulnerable because of what Trump of America is doing, what China is doing, what this country is doing, or whatever another country is doing. What we don't realize is that by playing victim, we are actually absolving ourselves from the national measures or the regional measures that we need to undertake. And unless and until we undertake those measures, when I was sent this particular topic, No Planet and the Global Imperatives, I was like, okay, what do I write about this? I can say volumes on what Pakistan has suffered, but I also realize that when Pakistan suffers, there are also certain things that Pakistan is doing to enhance its misery and not even to respond to the global climate change impacts. Yes, countries such as ours don't have the type of wherewithals. We don't have the toolkit, the perfect toolkit to respond to these problems that are arising. But are we really carrying out the right measures and practices? This is a massive question that we need to ask ourselves. We do whatever little we do, but most of the time we really wallow in this victim narrative that, oh, we are the victims. The floods have happened because of what happened, the measures that were taken place in the global north, and now the global south is suffering. The developed countries have done this and the developing are suffering. But let's go back and look at, has Pakistan or the people of Pakistan really understood where to live, how to save water, how not to go for deforestation, how to cultivate the mangroves and not cut them short, how not to make the megacities warmer? No, we are not doing that. Are we really doing green infrastructural development? We are now waking up to those realities, but not so much enough. But we can stop that. Pakistan already has a temperature which is risen by 0.57 Celsius, and we are trying to prevent ourselves from going beyond the 1.5 benchmark, but 0.5 Celsius in 20 years can actually lead us to beyond the 1.5 benchmark, so we really need to be very, very careful about this. So another thing that we are doing is that we are not mitigating enough, we are adapting. We are trapped in the politics of adaptability. And we have made the new climate change, we have kind of adapted ourselves to the new climate normal. We have intensifying heat, we grumble about this, but are we doing anything to lessen that heat? No, we are not. Have we made our homes weather compliant? No, we haven't. Have we added more green space to the cities? No, we are not doing that. We are feverishly pursuing huge infrastructural developments which are enhancing more population into these cities with less and less space and capacity to absorb so much of human capital into these places and making these things difficult. We have more cyclones taking place. We have more floods taking place. We are bracing ourselves to this new climate reality that, yes, there would be floods. But have we done enough to stop those would-be flood phenomenon? That is not happening. We have very limited governance potential. The citizens, the governments at the regional level, at the provincial level, we don't have enough measures or enough training to look into these factors. And that's the point, that again, we look at the security sector as the ones who would respond because of their training, because of their past experience, if they have any, and once they develop, then of course that becomes more of a curse for them, because then they go out, they do all the rescue, they do all the rehabilitation, but we don't make the citizens as an active participant into climate mitigation and adaptability. But we are adapting, but we are not mitigating it enough. We are also in this context of playing victims to the climate vulnerability, not putting enough finances or certain percentage of GDP into looking at these problems. And if we don't do that, and we keep looking at the global north for bailing us out in terms of any disaster that takes place, and with more Trumps in the world, there is very limited funding available for countries such as us. So I think this is where it is going to become very difficult for countries such as Pakistan and others who have faced natural disasters beyond their capacity. It is also kind of good news that now we have to do our stuff ourselves, and we really need to brace ourselves for that. As I said, South Asia is one of the most affected and the most vulnerable to climate shocks, with each country having its own climate legacy. And because of that, there are more than 750 million people, 750 to 800 million people who would be affected and stand affected as of now because of the climate change aspect. You look at Dhaka today, you look at Karachi, Lahore, and Delhi are two cities partitioned, bordered, thanks to the political issues, but they share something in common. Whenever the winters are approaching, there's a smog that descends on these two countries, these two cities, and it refuses to go away. It doesn't respect the Wagah or Atari border. It doesn't respect the long marches that are taking place and people doing all those patriotic songs and dance. The smog happens. And that absolutely kills the livelihood of the two cities. The AQI index of these cities I think at times they don't even match up to the indices. They're so bad. And that is so non-discriminatory. That doesn't respect any borders or partitions or boundaries. So we really, really need to take a collective regional effort when we look at that. I think we need to also develop secondary cities, make them better, take away the pressure from the primary cities, the mega cities that we have. You can't have the entire country. Yesterday, our colleague from Nepal made a from Sri Lanka made a very, very strong observation. He said the entire population of Sri Lanka, a certain percentage, 80% of the entire population of Sri Lanka is what is the population of Dhaka today. And if you come to Karachi, I think the entire population of Sri Lanka is what Karachi's population is. So you can't have cities which are so big. These are city-states. We need to really get imaginative and start thinking what else we can do. We need to also rise up to the climate ethics. We need to develop sufficient climate ethics so to come out of this vulnerability trap. At the local level, what can we do? Go back to the old practices. Try and forget the colonial legacy that many of us have developed. The dams, the waterways, how water is preserved. Many of these are the handouts or hand-downs of the colonial legacy. They were meant for a particular purpose. They were meant for a population which was much less than what we have in South Asia today. Can we actually think indigenously, think locally, and also consider how do we preserve these waterways? I think there's a very, very strong need to do that. Whenever floods take place, a major issue for Pakistan is that there are populations who go back and start living in those vulnerable zones. The country has tried, the government has tried many a times to make people move away from those affected areas to new neighborhoods. They refuse to do that. How can you incentivize or educate people to these new realities is also a major question. We cannot actually adopt practices what are happening in the US and adopt them to what is happening in Pakistan. We can only do that as to what is happening in South Asia, because there's a lot of local wisdom that can feed into having better climate ethics and developing those climate responses. What are the governments doing? I will just slightly touch on Pakistani government's initiatives that it has tried to do in order to address the climate change impact. But at the South Asian level, at the regional level, despite having several mechanisms, we haven't done enough. Especially when we look at the local level, between India and Pakistan, we have 2-3 major issues. And even at the Pakistani level, One, we have an active conflict taking place in Afghanistan, which unfortunately makes the space of Afghanistan extremely hostile for its own people. And you have an outflux of a massive level of Afghan nationals coming to Pakistan as refugees, as aliens, as asylum seekers, and most of them are again living in these big cities where they are then being sent to other countries. But what is happening in Afghanistan? Is the Afghan government live to this issue of climate change? No, they think that's just a Western gimmick. So there's no big deal. It's just being a bad Muslim that makes the earthquakes take place. It's just being a poor Muslim that makes floods take place and all of that. The conflict, the long conflict in Afghanistan has made the agricultural sector extremely hostile for the Afghans. There are live mines embedded in the agricultural fields. There are no agricultural fields actually left. Most of the cultivation in Afghanistan is drugs related, and there is no turnaround to that. So how do you make the conflict and climate question compatible to each other? How do you mitigate these two issues? That is extremely important for us to realize. The spillover of Afghan conflict, the war on terror, quote unquote, has had a drastic impact on the northwest frontier province, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan. And that has again made the things very difficult. That has also given rise to local traditional conflict, which occupies the military in a very, very difficult situation where the military has to learn all its lessons all over again as to how to address a locally based problem with several drivers to that problem, both external as well as internal. The other problem Pakistan has where you look at the conflict-related impact on climate change, and that is the Pakistan-India conflict on Siachen, which is actually very difficult for both the countries. There have been proposals which have been thought out very well by both the countries, but unfortunately they could not be inked out, Siachen being one of the most prominent of those conflicts, where there was this conversation of making this entire area into a peace park, which is the most required situation at the moment. I think Siachen has single-handedly, at the scale of the violence there, managed to claim more people through climate-related deaths rather than through the guns and the bullets. So we need to really rethink on these aspects. How much would that really impact the overall long sustainable life of South Asia? India and Pakistan, I wish we can rise above our personal problems and think of converting these areas into peace parks, into non-violent zones, into neutral zones, and have some kind of, not out of the box, but actually within the box solution to this. There are several solutions available within the box, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But we are not willing to do that because we are so badly stuck in our mindsets. Then we look at the Indus water problem. Pakistan keeps saying, being the lower riparian state, that India has dried us up. The Beas River doesn't work. The Indus has also become less. The Ravi and the Jhelum and all of these rivers are not flowing to their full capacity. Yes, they are not. That's the nature of the conflict. And thanks to our Indian politicians, you keep hearing slogans like there's going to be water and blood baths, and the rivers of Pakistan would be red with the bloods of the Pakistanis, and all that crap that goes on with that. That's high politics. That's irrelevant politics. Let's ask Pakistan, have we managed the water well? We haven't. What are we doing with our river waters? We need to also address that question. If we have this external factor where you have your adversary already catching up on your water areas, then you need to be double careful about how you manage the water, how you mitigate the water, and the adaptability and the mitigation has to go hand in hand. And we need to have some very good, strong politics and legislations to also mitigate the Indus water problem. So there have to be issues that we need to really address. Okay, so when we come to this factor that we have the individuals who consider that the individuals themselves are not the climate violators. Whatever actions individuals are undertaking, they are not actions which are very harmful. But are they? We need to ask these questions. Many of the practices carried out by me, by you, by all the individuals have a cascading impact, and those cascading impacts then have this collective imprint on climate change. The structural injustice that I talked about initially, that those who are affected by climate change are not the initiators, we need to come out of this particular narrative and also see what we can do. We are also still wedded to the legacies of colonialism, and the continuum of those legacies is making things very difficult for us. So we need to really get over that thing. Now coming to Pakistan. As I said, that the average temperature of Pakistan is on the rise. We have shrinking winters, we have unbearable summers, we've had no rains in the last 4 months, just 1 day of rain and people were celebrating like crazy with cars bumper to bumper on the roads because we didn't really know how to handle this. If you have 2 days or at least 5 hours of rain in Karachi, you have a city that is totally blocked, which is totally choked. You have to see the expression on the driver's face whenever the first drop of rain takes place in Karachi. That's absolute panic, that it actually seems that there's a nuclear war about to happen, and they'll totally melt away when the rain takes place, because they know that in case they don't reach their destination well within time, they're stuck for an entire day. So what are we doing? What are we making our cities and infrastructures into? Pakistan, as I mentioned, is one of the 8 countries which is considered to be as part of the third pole. We've had 7,000 glaciers, but unfortunately in the last 5 to 10 years, many of those glaciers have developed glacial lakes, and 3,000 new glacial lakes developed. The Arctic warming itself, which is happening 4 times more than the expected rate, is having a drastic impact on how Pakistan's third pole is also warming up. The bad news that we received a few days back was that the Everest peak is no longer covered with snow, and the snow and the ice is melting. What are we going to have? Nepal bases its economy, a massive chunk of its economy, on tourism, the Everest tourism, and that is going to dry away. The same may happen, because they're all part of the same link, to K2, to any of those 8,000s that we have in our country. And that takes care of several other things. So the ripple effect needs to be looked into. Pakistan's rivers, they're shrinking, they're getting into high floods. At the same time, when we look at the Arabian Sea, it is, at least from Karachi, the western coast of Pakistan's sea is one of the most polluted areas that we can come across. The eastern one. When you go towards the Makran coast, the western part of the coastal belt, it is one of the most beautiful areas, one of the least developed areas. Balochistan suffers as a result of that. But what is the excuse? If we develop these areas, then they would become equally polluted. So I think that's not an excuse for not developing places. That is a reason that we need to see how we make sustainable development tourism compatible to what is happening, the green tourism, the green initiatives that will make things better. Pakistan is fast doing away with its mangroves cover, which is again adding to the soil erosion, to the death of the climate environment all around our eastern coast. At the moment, Pakistan stands in terms of climate risk 87 out of 100. In terms of the SDG goals, 125 out of 166 countries. When it comes to disaster risk vulnerability, it's 18 out of 151 countries. And when it comes to social vulnerability, it is 37 out of 191 countries, which is very unfortunate. The super floods of 2022 ended up with a loss of $30 billion for Pakistan. And we needed a minimum of $16 billion to spearhead our reconstruction efforts. We had the loss of roads, bridges, rail links, construction, housing, agricultural sector, and these are the tangible aspects. What are the intangible aspects? 37.54% of the workforce went unemployed. 4 million acres of land was inundated. 800,000 cattle died as a result of the super flood of 2022 alone. We have had 1.8 million people surrounded by stagnant flood water. Then we had a missing out on the winter crop. The food insecurity led to 7 million people. 1.9 million people are at the risk of non-monetary poverty. The schools were damaged, which affected 2.2 million children, and 8 million people were displaced. So this is just one mega climate crisis, and we are still not listening to the death knell of what a climate crisis does for us. What has Pakistan done as a result of that? It has initiated several aspects. One is the Living Indus initiative, which tries to have river bank filtration. It also goes for underground dams, nature-based flood solutions, and several other factors that go with that. Water value chain factors. Pakistan is also looking at the Recharge Pakistan scheme. All of these aspects are happening under the Ministry of Climate Change, and they're trying to see what happens. But unfortunately, when I was looking at the data of Ministry of Climate Change, the data was at least 3 years old. So those data are also not updated. It had initiated under another government, but they're still living up to it, the 100 billion tree tsunami. So to kill the deforestation effort. Then there's the Green Pakistan initiative, which also looks at the transportation sector and several other factors that can enhance the protection of various areas and also address climate change as a threat multiplier. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I've overstepped my time limit, and I would end this presentation by this factor that if I become very selfish about preserving my home alone without realizing that where I live is a common space, the climate change impact would not only climb up, but it would multiply, and it would impact not only me and you today, but in the future as well. Climate change ethics, making this a new reality or a new norm, adapting to these aspects is not enough. We really need to rise up to the challenge, and each one of us need to understand what our contribution to future of our countries and to ourselves is all about. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation, Professor Malik. You obviously, as your title of your presentation shows, you had from the very beginning had a low politics approach to climate security, overall security. And I find lots of threads together in both presentations, which we will discuss. I'll summarize at the end. But now, let us invite questions, comments from the audience. I will request not to make big comments, but pointed questions addressed to either of the presenters. We may take few questions at the first round, and then I'll request the presenters to respond. So please.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Aisha Kabir. I'm a journalist working with Pruthamallo. So just a short observation and question to both of our speakers, and that is that from listening to both of our respected speakers, it was very obvious that the problems we have, not just in Pakistan and Bangladesh, but the whole region are very common. Like Dr. Salma was talking about the Afghan refugees. We have a similar problem with the Rohingya refugees. And and there's several other problems, the river problems. You're talking about the Indus River. We've got our problem with the river Tista, with the common, and many other common factors. So I was just thinking that we had a very ideal mechanism in place, SARC, the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, which is non-functional now. So I'd like to ask both of you, how feasible do you think is a revival of SARC? Not only feasible, but how essential do you think in reference to climate security?
Thank you, Professor Salma Malik, for coming all the way from Pakistan to Bangladesh. This is Lieutenant Colonel Kamrul Hassan. I'm from Defense Services Command and Staff College. So my question to both the panelists, firstly it is environmental issue and then the security issue. I want to ask that now the world is going to the freshwater crisis, and the conflicts in future is going to be on the freshwater crisis or management. So India and Pakistan, these two countries are managing this freshwater crisis of Indus River by your Neelam Jhelum projects and River Talbela Dam, lots of dams you have this. So these two countries are having lot of security concerns and contentious issues. Still you are managing this freshwater crisis amicably. So the problem when it comes on India and Bangladesh perspective, how we can manage this crisis, taking lessons from India and Pakistan perspective. And also in the perspective of China, they are preparing the Yarlung Sangpus dams. The biggest dam is coming within very few years. So my question related to the environmental issue and the lessons from India and Pakistan perspective to Professor Salma Malik. And now to the AVM Mahmood sir, how can these issues of freshwater crisis or this crisis can take us or derive us to the security concern over this South Asian context if we consider the new case of China, India and Bangladesh, the case of Brahmaputra or Yarlung Sangpu, and also the Indus River crisis. How can this impact to the regional security issues in South Asia? Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Aisha Saiba, for your kind question, and Lieutenant Colonel Kamrul Hassan Saab. Ma'am, I think there is no better idea than revival of SARC or making SARC once again relevant. SARC was constructed or made through the strong efforts of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, primarily as a forum that would not look at the traditional politics. But unfortunately, thanks to India and Pakistan, it was reduced to such a forum. At the same time, I've also seen that SARC, through its retreats, which was not a formal structure, would have these openings available to both India and Pakistan whenever there was some kind of an impasse, that the leaders would meet there and they would have a conversation even in the worst of times, and there would be a revival of the SARC process. I think we need the type of political acumen to make such aspects work. SARC is the only representation of the entire region. For India, it is the context of -1, and the -1, of course, is Pakistan, because we don't meet eye to eye. Now, can this really work? Can India physically chuck Pakistan out of the region? It cannot. So the easiest thing to do is not to have SARC work, or have something which is akin to SARC but does not have Pakistan as part of it. Fair enough. But my plea here is, as I said while I was speaking, that when the smog hits Delhi and Lahore, people suffer equally. The AQI becomes terrible in both sides equally. It's the people who die. It's the people who get the asthma. The health sector, the food security, everything gets affected. When the COVID-19 struck, it were the people of South Asia who died. The plight for a mother, for a son, for a father were the same. It did not really see if it was a Pakistani mother or an Indian mother. It was a Hindu mother or a Muslim mother. So I think so long as we keep ourselves divided into these silos, nothing is going to work. You can even have a -1 formula, which doesn't have Pakistan today. But tomorrow, let's say Bangladesh is not in favor, in the favored nations, then you have a -2 formula. If it's Nepal, -3, then how do you make anything work? The beauty of a regional cooperative network is that you have even the worst of your enemies as part of this and bicker with each other, do whatever. But the nature of SARC was on non-traditional. And it was specifically made not to have bilaterals in it. And we have actually gone in reverse. So the ideal answer is absolutely yes. As of yesterday, SARC needs to be revived. Will it happen? It's anybody's guess. Lieutenant Colonel Kamrul Hassan Saab, the Indus Water Treaty, it has worked well, although it is getting its fair share of political wrangling. And Pakistan does have problems when it comes to the Indus Water Treaty. And I don't think that any of those problems that both India and Pakistan have, India has its own, Pakistan has its own, are the ones that cannot be negotiated and cannot be talked about. But it's a lot of the problems in South Asia primarily are dependent on genuine free will and the capacity of leadership to make these dialogues meaningful. We nearly had a agreement on Siachen, just short of signing. We stopped, both sides. We nearly had an agreement on Sir Creek water boundary. Short of one signature, it stopped. So both sides have agreed that we are going to disagree and we are not going to cooperate with each other. And as long as we keep doing that, things will not work. Today, the water capacity is lowering. Tomorrow it would be worse. So we really need to think about it. And the fact that India thinks that being an upper riparian country, Pakistan suffers more, it's very political. And one can talk endlessly about it. It's also very emotional. But that's not exactly the reality. The things are very difficult for both sides in the coming future, and we really need to wake up to the reality. Thank you. So.
Thank you, ma'am. I think she has answered both the questions. I'll just elaborate on whatever she has said. First to Aisha Kabir's, if there is a need for SARC to be revived once again in order to address the climate problem, isn't it? Now, we all understand the importance of SARC. There is no denying the fact. I was also born and brought up in Karachi. My childhood was spent there. And today I have not been after Bangladesh became independent. And today she has painted a very grim picture of Karachi. It is as grim as that of, say, for example, in terms of climate and weather. And I know that my winters in childhood were very cool, very embracing, and very, very, what you call it, from health point of view, extremely fit, apt. It is not only, if Karachi is affected, now imagine it will be Calcutta or New Delhi will not have any kind of respite tomorrow. Because climate is such a thing. On one side, we have got this scientific agenda telling us that the climate, if it continues to have global warming at 4 degrees centigrade, the planet will not survive beyond 2100. On the other hand, there is another scientific agenda which is saying that the space is expanding. It is like Simon Kuznets' national income curve, that a time will come when temperature will automatically start decreasing because of the expansion of the space. But what is most important, what we are doing now. So if what we are doing now, and if you find that it is India which is being, it is Pakistan which is being affected by climate, as she has described, it is Bangladesh being affected by climate, India will not have any kind of reprieve. So from that point of view, I personally feel that there is a need for a revival of SARC once again, because it was a kind of non-traditional, in fact, security, what do you call it, mechanism for the 7 countries to work together in South Asia. But the most important in that sector, who can make a change, not the political masters, because political masters, in all the 3 countries, you will find that who do politics in order to gain votes. It is the civil society who has to bring in the pressure. Clear? This is my answer to you, Aisha Kabir. And Lieutenant Colonel Kamrul Hassan, let me tell you a story. You're from the staff college, isn't it? I was, in fact, instructor in staff college, and I had a student. He was Colonel Gandhi from Saudi Arabia. The Colonel Gandhi, I told once, Colonel Gandhi, you don't have to worry about anything because Saudi Arabia is very rich. He told me, sir, you are richer than Saudi Arabia. Then I asked him how. Then he said that I'm ready to trade off one of your rivers for the entire oil wealth of Saudi Arabia. So you can imagine how important the fresh water is for different countries. So again, I will tell you, it is China, it is India, and it is Bangladesh. More than the political masters, they never come to senses, in fact. They never reach a solution. It is the scientific community which is making us aware of the importance of this climate change, right? The scientific agenda, we have to make it stronger. And the best place for that is, one, for Bangladesh, India and Pakistan is the SARC, again I'm telling you, and also the International Forum, United Nations, okay. I have told you about the carbon offsetting plan. Say, now I am an aviator, I know exactly what happens. So here Bangladesh Biman, so it has got a little older generation of aircraft. So if it flies over Europe, so if it has emitted more than what is allocated to it, it gives a fine. Now you tell me, if an aircraft which is coming from Europe, if it emits more than what is allocated to it, how do I get the fine? Because I don't have the toolkit to measure this carbon footprint of that European aircraft. Clear? So that kind of scientific tool has to be made available to me. That's why I'm telling you the best place for us to start this epistemic understanding of climate science is the universities as well as our institutions, because we emit tremendous amount of carbon dioxide. Okay, we never take into account how many hours the United States Air Force flies in the air, how much the fighter jets emit carbon over Europe or over Russia. We are mainly interested on the poor people's need of, in fact, burning wood to get, in fact, heat for his cooking. That is the, in fact, tragedy. And if we do not take into account these things, in future we might see there are two groups of countries, not. There are two, in fact, classes of people. One is rich class, the other one is your poor class. And then probably we might have to go back to reading Marx once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hussain. Please introduce yourself and
Thank you. Well, my name is Shahid. I worked for the government for many years, home and abroad. And coming to the topic, I think both the speakers made eloquent overview of a very, very big subject. I'm not going to detail the climate security in South Asia. When coming to South Asia, I think we just I'm making this observation, then I'll go into question. Just give me a few minutes. Having said that, South Asia, of course, we are talking about environment, and we know that environment, climate transcends the boundaries. So when we talk about South Asia, all the countries in South Asia, I'll not name these countries, we all will know what we are talking about, has an impact on each other also. So if we are talking, first I'll go into very able Air Vice Marshal Mahmood. He has made a statement from the military dimension. With the increase of our population, as the population, Bangladesh is one of the most populated, I think 7th or 8th was the correct status, I do not know, but sometime it is 7th, sometime it's 8th, in a small land mass. Now, what happens when our portion of our land goes underwater? The population will have to cross the borders. So it will have an impact with our neighbors. So how do we solve this problem? This is if you have barbed wire, it's not going to solve. We have seen what happens. Everything will break. Therefore, the countries around must take into cognizance. That's very important. This is a military dimension, and the question is to, of course, Air Vice President. And Dr. Salma, professor of Qaid-e-Azam University, she also spoke about this region in great length. I will not go into it, but I think she made very strong point. It has become one of the most hazardous capitals, this region. All the capitals are, living-wise, is very difficult. I think what COVID has ruined us, I think we are going to ruin our lungs through the pollutions that we have. That we should talk about. But why we have not been able to solve it, why we cannot rectify it, do we need some experts to come and solve it? I do not know. I think you being a professor, you have worked on this in this particular area, you can shed some light. So why we have to wait for an expert? Why our own people cannot solve this problem? There were many polluted cities. I was assigned in London also. So London once upon a time was a very polluted place. It has cleared. I know the plane could not land over there, and people had to shut down many things. And that has become quite clean. The River Thames was so polluted that there was outburst in the River Thames, and the naval vessel was blown off. That is the social, and the Parliament building had to be closed. Now they solved it, but why we cannot solve our own problem? Now, why don't we clean our own rivers? Why don't we plant more trees? We don't need extra experts to come and solve our own problem. So this is, I'm sure the moderator is, giving me hints that I should end over here. So these are the few questions. There are many questions, but I'll end over here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shahid. Please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Shamim Ahmed. I'm a retired ambassador. And what I have to state here is more by way of making a comment than posing a question. And that is more to supplement the answer that has been provided by both Dr. Malik and Air Vice Marshal Mahmood in response to a question that was asked by, I think, Colonel Cameroon. And I think his question was, how come that the Indus Basin Treaty works better than our water sharing treaty with India? The one point that I would provide here, Dr. Malik might note, and she would know, that Indus Basin Treaty was signed by three parties, India, Pakistan, and the World Bank. And the World Bank here was a guarantor, and there is also a sort of a guarantee clause of the minimum availability of water, but you may not be getting that amount of water because of total availability. So that is the main factor here. And whatever agreement we have done with India, the last one was back in 1996, the Ganges Water Sharing Treaty, at a time when I was the head of the South Asia desk in the ministry. We couldn't invoke any third party as a guarantor. So this is a basic point here. I mean, that sort of underlines the difference between these two treaties. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Shamim. Let us take these two questions. So, first again.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I absolutely agree with you, and that's the point that I said, that we have externalized the climate change debate, which then makes us, thank you, which then kind of makes us absolved of all the responsibilities of looking at the climate change issue. There are a lot of local solutions, and there have to be local solutions which are context-specific, which are case study-specific. As I said, what happens in another area is culturally fit for their area and not us, although there are a lot of common problems. I'm not saying that if there's a migration issue in Europe, it has no similarity for South Asia. All of these aspects are interrelated, but the solutions have to be as such. When I look at a lot of solutions to the climate change, one very, very pertinent example that we find is when you had rural women from India who tried to save the deforestation from taking place, and the tree huggers, the Chipko or the Chipko movement of India, that was a local solution. How much trees could they save? But it had a cascading impact, and you do have a lot of people doing that. And now the debate, the indigenous debate on climate change and the country level initiatives on climate change have started to have women as well as children or the youth as part of this, as the stakeholders. So the gender and the youth have also become part of the inclusivity in this conversation, which is going to make it better. And I hope that they can come up with better indigenous solutions. And Ambassador Saab, I absolutely agree with you. With the IBRD as the guarantor, the Indus Water Treaty saw a better life, and I think it remained effective more strongly than otherwise. Or else India and Pakistan really have no hope with each other. We have decided that we have to disagree on everything. So we could have killed this process as well. But I think there was also a realization in the previous regimes that water is a very valuable resource. Reminds me of the Lawrence of Arabia thing, my well and your well, and you end up killing each other over the well waters. So there was more acumen, more sense of responsibility, as well as, I think, better understanding and less emotions when it came to critical issues, which I think we really need to go back to and realize that we are killing each other's common future, and it's nothing nationalistic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. My answer to Ambassador Shahid, sir, your first question is, it is a very profound one, and I've got an answer. The point is that if two armies are fighting across borders, okay, you'll see that one is killing the other. And I'm sure when the displaced persons, they cross over to the border, to the other country, then there is no way that the soldiers can shoot at them. It is not simply possible, okay. We have to look for solutions that once they have come into our country, then how to repatriate them back. The question of, in fact, national border crossing by civilians and being victimized by the other militaries, it is simply morally not acceptable, and it will not happen, I suppose. Like it has not happened in case of Rohingyas who came into the Bangladesh territory after the last incident. Okay. And you also do not get into a war with the neighboring country from where these victims have transmigrated into your own country, right? So this is the moral question. This is my answer to you. And the other point is that I personally feel that militaries can get together, and militaries can develop also techniques and tactics by which they can reduce the emission of carbon dioxide. Like say, for example, I'm a helicopter pilot, and if you're flying in formation, if your formation technique, say the front aircraft is very close to the second aircraft, and then you're getting the lift with the help of the aerodynamic flow of the front's rotor blades, instead of making use of more engine power, you are in fact emitting less amount of carbon dioxide into the air. These are some of the techniques, in fact, that we should collaborate with each other in learning from each other. And say it can also happen with the fighter jets. At what height you are emitting the carbon, and that is going to, in fact, pollute the atmosphere more. These are all scientific, in fact, things that I'm talking about. Like say, for example, you can also have satellite reflectors into the atmosphere, which will reflect the light back, and that's how the light coming to the earth, heat coming to the earth, will be of lesser, intensity. On these things, in fact, we need to cooperate and collaborate amongst the countries. This will not only increase your knowledge in science, but it will also help you in understanding how science and technology can be used for the greater good of mankind with regard to reduction of poverty, which is #1 sustainable development goal for UN mandated SDGs. This is my answer to your question. And sir, I'm very grateful to you that you have also mentioned about the involvement of World Bank. Like I say that for the 3 countries, Bangladesh, China, and India should sit together and come to a solution. But the problem is whether China, the way Pakistan and India, they see to each other the same way China and India wouldn't see each other. So that's why we have to take this problem to the United Nations and seek a different kind of help. How much of what do you call it, how much of influence, moral influence we have on India is more important in this case than probably, seeking support of China in reducing the problem, because both India and Bangladesh will be affected by this. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Bharat Bhushan. I'm a journalist from India. So I've got two short comments and a question. On Chipko movement, which is hugging the tree, which was started by women. I come from that region of Uttarakhand where it started. Now, people think it was a highly successful movement. It saved trees. But the movement was not about saving trees. It was about granting locals access to reserved forests for collecting minor forest produce. But the narrative that was built nationally and globally was of protecting trees. And today, the local women who protested have no access to the resources for which they started the movement. So you start the movement for something else, it becomes quite something else. The second comment about Indus Water Treaty, about which I'll be talking tomorrow, but as the ambassador said, World Bank was a third party. There's a dispute resolution mechanism. But the difference really is that the Indus Water Treaty divides rivers, 3 western flowing rivers to Pakistan, 3 eastern flowing rivers to India. While the Ganga Water Treaty or the proposed and failed Teesta Water Treaty is about sharing water of the same river between Upper Riparian and Lower Riparian. So the treaties are completely different. And the Ganga Water Treaty has no dispute resolution mechanism built into it. My question is really to Air Vice Marshal Mahmood Hussain. I mean, fascinating talk. I was just wondering whether there are any audits available. You quoted 2 studies, one of the Ukraine war and its carbon contribution and Israel's Gaza genocide. But for other wars, is there any attempt at auditing the climate impact of military actions? Because a lot of these actions may not be linked to war. For example, Siachen. You've built roads in the snow to take trucks up to the base camp. From there, you laid kerosene pipelines going up to the top of the ridge, which will have leakages. So are there any climate audits available of military actions of any kind anywhere?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. For me, it's a pleasure to get a question from a journalist of your stature, sir, about the data from the conflicts. The data are available in many cases, many conflicts, and not for all, but also the data are available for your pollution resulting from Siachen operation. That is there. That is also there. But the point is that people also feel that we have got employment of forces over Siachen. But the point is that so many people are also dying there. But what is the geographic importance of Siachen either to Pakistan or to, say, India? You cannot moral response. It is largely because of pride and prestige of both nations that they have employed troops out there. Unless the political masters stand and try to find out a solution to it, that the lives of human beings are more important, or the lives of the soldiers are more important than probably fighting over a small piece of land, then only probably we'll see the solution. But again, the point is that what is the impact? What will be the impact of such political decision on the attitude of the common public, isn't it? Like say, I have seen in Bangladesh, say, the political masters, they might like to have a very good relationship with India. It might be the same in India also. But the point is that when it comes to the common people, there is a general tendency of being looked down upon by India as a hegemon. These things are there. But I have always said, whatever things are there, if we are rational, and the rationality can come through our pursuit of scientific investigation, then probably things will change. And whenever we are carrying out the scientific investigation, you have the truth available to you. That must also be taught in the schools And then the awareness has to be grown strongly in favor of that. But you know much more than I do, probably what kind of attitude the Indians have about Bangladesh at their public level, or say at their intellectual level or their political level, isn't it? So all these things affect our cooperation for a transnational problem like climate security. Thank you, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. I have one question for Professor Salma Malik. My name is Nusrat Jahan. I teach international relations at Jahangirnagar University. I have one question, and it is about developing our research capacity on climate change negotiations. I repeat, climate change negotiations. We know that impacts of climate change are linked to social and applied sciences, and understanding that this topic, it requires it's a crucial task. And Bangladesh receives a substantial amount of foreign assistance for our capacity building and meeting climate change challenges. Our development partners such as World Bank and JICA, DFID, they have been assisting us for many years to mitigate the adverse impact of climate change. However, the actual scenario, especially in capacity building in research field, is very, very weak in Bangladesh. For instance, we university faculty members, if we decide to undertake qualitative research on climate change negotiations, we usually find a good number of people who are able to describe our climate change challenges from different perspectives. But if we see that there is a severe shortage when we concentrate on more specific issues of climate change negotiations, for example, Green Climate Fund or clean development mechanisms. And in foreign university, like in the USA or UK, what we see that a professor with expertise in climate change stays in that field of research for many years to gain in-depth knowledge. But in Bangladesh, we often see that an expert who has been talking about climate change, for example, in the media, electronic media, we also see them talking about terrorism, human trafficking, on many issues. But we know that an expert cannot get expertise in all fields at a time. So my question is for Professor Salma Malik. You are a university faculty member in Pakistan University. How do universities in Pakistan create a dedicated pool of researchers on climate change challenges or negotiations? And is there any model in Pakistan University that Bangladeshi universities can also follow to implement this, to create a very dedicated research, a pool of research scholars at the university levels in Bangladesh? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Nusrat. I think that's a very, very important question. What you have alluded to are the seasonal experts like me who talk about these issues from time to time, having very little in-depth, dedicated hours spent into these aspects. There are several reasons to that. Number one, as I said, we have externalized the root cause of climate change to the Western world. Likewise, we've also externalized the discourse and the narrative that comes on climate change to what is driven down from the West. And a lot of that is also steeped in the colonial educational legacy that we have. Now there are several things which are happening. Number one, of course, is there's this very fast subaltern as well as deconstructing colonial discourse movement all over South Asia. India takes a lead in that. I think Bangladesh comes a close second, and Pakistan is following suit. So I think if the drive for having a decolonized discourse construction or reconstruction of discourse happens, then we are also in a better place to have our own thinking about such critical aspects. So long we remained confined to, all the big names. And I'm not saying that they haven't done good work. They have done immense work. But at the same time, how many people in our region, in your country, in my country, have done the type of discourse development which stands as tall as the big names in non-traditional security aspects that have been mentioned here as well? So it will take time. but I think it's just a matter of one generation, and we will have a sizable impact of indigenous discourse, which is deep-rooted and also which is wedded into to the problem by itself. In Pakistan, because I'm not a Bangladesh expert, in Pakistan, a lot of climate change discourse is led by non-governmental and INGO sector. And we have kind of siloed it into that aspect. Oh, okay, this is the climate person. Okay, this is how he or she is going to dress up, and this is how they're going to talk about these things. And they have to per se be from the NGO sector. And half of the time, we end up being true. But there is this seasonal interest in these problems, and then secondly, seasonal expertise that is developing. But it is getting better with time. It is not coming down. So I think in times to come, a decade and a half maximum, we would have people who are truly invested in this area. And I'm also not saying that the NGO sector or those who are working dedicatedly on climate change are not the right people. Absolutely, they're the perfect people. But there has to be a connectivity between the non-governmental sector as well as the academia, who work hand in glove in looking at these things. And also the third aspect of this troika are the policy makers or the decision makers who get the feedback from this expertise as to what the policies should be like. What at this moment we have is that the academia or the non-governmental sector, they can say whatever they need to say, but the policy makers, and I think this is more a South Asian aspect and otherwise as well, they don't listen to what is happening. And the part of that is also what Bharat Bhushanji pointed out, that we have been actually raised thinking of Chipko movement as something which the women did to save the trees of their area. But then there was also the Narmada Bachao Andolan. So you do have indigenous things, but the way the narrative comes out is very different. And you remain wedded to a notion only to get corrected once that this is not how things were happening. So I guess we need to invest a lot more, and there has to be a complete circle where all of these aspects are wedded to one another. The academia, the non-governmental, the policy makers, the decision makers, they need to be hand in glove with this.
Thank you. Sure.
Can I just respond to a question? Ma'am, in fact, just your question has got, say, for example, climate change, when we divide it into two broad strands, it has got two parts of two sciences. One is the social science part, the other one is physical science part. When we talk about social science part, it's much easier. In fact, we have got much available literature also in Bangladesh. But when it comes to the physical science part, then it becomes very difficult, because you have to have the toolkit, instruments by which to really test the hypothesis, and for which you need not only funding. You can always have seasonal experts on the social science side of climate change, but to become physical science expert on climate change, you need years of concentration on investigation and research work and the availability of funding, which we do not have, which the West has. So the brilliant students in climate science, what they do, they go to the Western universities and study there, and then they quench the thirst or hunger of their knowledge. This is the fundamental fact. Second is that when it comes to the scientific understanding of climate change, I think we should cooperate with each other. I teach space science, and I understand how much costly it is to send a student to United States of America or Canada or, say, Australia to continue studies. But India has a very advanced space research program. We can always, at academic level, build up relationship with them. And I'm sure this is what we are not doing only because of our mindset. Clear. Pakistan, say, for example, has got an industry for the maintenance and repair of fast jet aircraft, but we never engage with them. So we buy aircraft at a very high price. So it is the same with your climate science. And if you look at the broad spectrum, how many brilliant journals we produce on issues related to social science, and now you ask me whether we produce a very brilliant journal on astrophysics or astronomy, you'll see none. That is reality. We have to accept that. So the understanding of STEM, what is STEM? Science, technology, mathematics, and we add with it another E, STEAM, English, is extremely important to be initiated right from the primary school. Thank you very much. Just, I'm an Air Force officer, say, just to compare, Pakistani Air Force is one of the leading, I understand that Indian Air Force is very much leading, but so far, when it comes to economics and the development stature of both the countries, Pakistani Air Force is one of the leading air forces in the world in terms of innovation and production. You'll be surprised. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmood. I think we have come to the time that we are overpassing. So I will give 2 minutes to Professor Malik, and then I will do a little summary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. As Dr. Mahmood had talked about Cyclone Bhola, the late Shanaz Begum, when the Cyclone Bhola took place, she recited a famous poet, Ibn Insha's poem, which went something like this. Allow me, if you don't mind, I'll first narrate it in Urdu and then very quickly in English. मौज उठे या आंधी आए, दिया जलाए रखना है. घर की खातिर सौ दुख झेले, घर तो आखिर अपना है. Whether it be a rough sea or adverse weather, we need to keep the kindle. We need to kindle the candle of hope. We have faced extreme adversities for our home only, but why should we bother? Why should we worry about this? Because at the end, it is our only and our own home. So I think if we look for the collective of South Asia, this is the spirit that we need to have. Whatever the weather pattern, whatever the adverse weather or the rough seas, we have to keep lit the candle of hope. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Salma. Thank you very much. I think, distinguished audience, we had an excellent session with the 2 distinguished presentations and also the very, very active and intelligent questions that you have posed to the presenters. Now, in just 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, I will summarize the discussions. In fact, you have noticed both the presentations have one common thread. That is, they have looked at climate security from the climate change impacts perspective. Now, these impacts cause many different issues. For example, you can look at climate environment degradation related risks through 2 lenses, either from the conflict lens, environmental conflict lens, like, for example, resource scarcity, generous tension within a country, or beyond borders spills over, or refugee, for example, is viewed as a climate security issue, and initiatives are taken to close the border because those are viewed as climate threat multipliers, as Dr. Hussain has mentioned, or the first in 2007 Center for Naval Analysis has introduced this expression, threat multiplier. Or we may look at climate security from the vulnerability-focused and adaptation, enhancing adaptation approach, because enhancing adaptation is the real security for the people of this South Asian region. South Asia is kind of a paradox, you know. We are the most densely populated region on earth, highest concentration of poverty. At the same time, still, after independence of more than 75 years, for example, still the primacy of military security lens dominates in South Asia. Primacy of the politics in our bilateral, multilateral regions and multilateral approaches, as well as military lens in dealing with security. This is very, very tragic. all the countries of South Asia are low-income countries, low-income countries. Highest concentration of poverty, highest number of climate-induced displacements. But still we don't have kind of a regional dialogues. For example, we have talked a lot about water sharing between India, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. But most we focus on sharing of water. Why don't we focus on development of water first, collective development of water, and then share it? But since my college days, we got to hear about sharing of water, what existing water. But existing water is going down and because of pollution. So first we need to develop a mechanism of, collective mechanism of developing and enhancing flow of fresh water. And then we can share. Because the pie, once the pie becomes bigger, then we each can get bigger share. This is one thing. Another thing is, both papers have focused on climate impacts in Pakistan in 2022. I remember the flood that cost more than $30 billion. Then this group of 77 chair in the UNFCCC negotiations process was the Ambassador Iqbal Mahmood as the chair. And then at his insistence, under his leadership, and then Professor Salim also was alive. I then worked as deputy to Professor Salim. And then we strongly fought in the negotiations within the group of 77, because this is the bigger umbrella of more than 140 developing countries. Okay. And that, led to the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund. But now, Loss and Damage Fund is extremely poor, less than $700 million. And both have mentioned about adaptation finance and climate finance. It's extremely poor. For the last 24 years, I have been serving as a climate finance negotiator with the Bangladesh delegation or with the LDC chair's delegation. And I'm really tired because adaptation finance is absolutely very, very poor. And there is a root cause for that, because there is a special disconnect in terms of a space, disconnect between the effects happening in one place, we are innocent victims, and the causes are there. The developed countries initially, and now the major emitters from the developing countries. India, as a low-income country, India is in the most difficult position in climate diplomacy because of their energy poverty still, and then low-income country, but the third largest emitter in terms of country. And then we don't have, we have the minimum peanuts in adaptation finance compared to the needs. And loss and damage finance, as I have mentioned, is still less than $1 billion. And now, coming to the existing scenario, major European countries have cut their budgets, aid budgets. Okay. UK, Germany, France, Switzerland, and other countries. Trump, has withdrawn from the, again, re-withdrawn, I'll tell. I wrote a piece in the Daily Star on his re-withdrawal and ramifications. And he totally stopped climate finance and also stopped for the time being for 3-4 months, at least all USAID budgets. So we are in a very, very difficult position to ensure climate security, environmental security for our citizens, because enhancing adaptive capacity, vulnerability-focused adaptive capacity is the best guarantee in ensuring human security against this increasing climate change impacts, which the UN Secretary General has mentioned the red code of humanity. Climate change impacts are the red code of humanity. But then he again lamented that under such a scenario, we live in a dysfunctional world order. And this dysfunctionality relates to a number of facts. Ambassador Hussain, you have mentioned about zero-sum game. Okay. But still, after even 500 years of state formation, starting from the Westphalian Order in 1648, still more than almost $500 will pass. Still, we hang on to the traditional concept of national sovereignty, territorial integrity, But Now, sovereignty, we have to look at from kind of a pooled sovereignty, where when sovereignties are pulled together and we deal with the global commons problems together, then each of the countries' sovereignty will go up and up. What we call a positive sum game. Your paper mentioned a non-zero sum game, because earlier international relations theory focused on zero sum game, that if I win, then you have to lose, otherwise I cannot win. But in a 21st century world where vulnerability, interdependence should lead us, because look at the data. During the last decade, developed countries are suffering more and more. Developing countries are suffering from the beginning of when climate change has been introduced in our consciousness, particularly starting from the 1990s, when IPCC was established. And I also had the privilege of serving as IPCC lead authors. And then last IPCC sixth assessment report has got a specific chapter on climate security. But still, we don't have this kind of understanding that military conflict perspective security will not lead us to. And that is why you both have mentioned about development of human capital. Ambassador Hussein has mentioned that military instruction materials must internalize climate science. This is what we need exactly. Capacity building is, even if Robinson Crusoe is left in a desolate island, I think, and America, I respect one aspect of America, among many critics, that America has got the highest respect for knowledge. But in South Asia still, the bridge between knowledge and political power is not as strong. It's absolutely fledgling still. And we are graduating, Bangladesh also is graduating from LDC just next year. And then we have to have a knowledge economy. So capacity building is the key. Capacity building. When people have got education, literacy, then political system also will go up, political culture will go up. And then the educated people, we can hammer our politicians, our military leaders, that you cannot do hanky-panky. You have to go for low politics issue approach to security. Then only our lives will be better in South Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Session Chair, Professor Mijanar Khan, for your valuable time and support. We will now break for lunch, which will be served at the back of the conference room, and we request everyone to return on time for the start of Session 2 at 2 p.m. Thank you.